Hi, I'm Maris. On Christmas Eve, my parents handed my sister the keys to a luxury condo, recorded the moment, toasted her future, while I stood there holding a slip of paper for a storage unit. No joke. That was my gift. A key to a cage of forgotten things. They smiled as if it made sense. As if I didn't. What started as another awkward holiday turned into uncovering forged documents, stolen investments, and a family legacy that had quietly erased me from every page. But the worst part? They never planned to tell me. Would you stay silent, or would you rewrite the story? I arrived in Cleveland just before dusk, the snow already icing the roads and making the air crisp enough to sting. The flight from Seattle had been long, delayed twice. I hadn't planned to come home this year. Not really. But guilt's a tricky thing. It rides your spine like a whisper you can't shake, and eventually, you pack your bags out of obligation, not anticipation. The house was just as I remembered it, warmly lit, garland draped across the mantel, that familiar cinnamon and pine scent heavy in the air. People laughed in the living room. My mother, Lenora, wore her holiday apron, red with gold stitching, as she refilled everyone's cedar mugs. My father, Reuben, hovered near the fireplace, phone in hand, trying to capture it all like he hadn't been part of the dysfunction just days before. Seraphine, my older sister, was already holding court by the tree, her hair dyed a vibrant copper, as if the universe owed her attention. And it always did. "Maris!" my mother called out when she spotted me in the doorway. "You made it just in time for the surprise." There was something rehearsed in her smile, like she'd been preparing it. I stepped out of my boots, brushed off the snow, and made my way into the den. The couches were rearranged in a semicircle. My father stood up, clapping his hands like an MC. "Everyone, gather around. We want to make this special." My chest tightened. Seraphine's face lit up as he handed her an elaborately wrapped silver box. The ribbon shimmered, and even before she untied it, I could sense it was something big. She pulled out a pair of keys. There was a delicate keychain attached, a small bronze charm shaped like a condo building. Her gasp was theatrical, but not disingenuous. "No, you didn't," Lenora beamed. "It's the place downtown you've been talking about. We closed on it last week." Applause erupted. A neighbor started filming. Champagne flutes clinked. Someone yelled out, "Now that's a Christmas gift." I smiled, because that's what you do in families like mine. You smile, even when your stomach flips and your hands start to shake just slightly. Then Reuben turned to me. "And for our practical girl," he said, pulling a tiny envelope from his pocket. "We thought this would be useful." I opened it. Inside was a rental agreement and a single key attached to a tag that read, "Unit C24, South Bay Storage." My heart didn't break. It stalled. "Your Christmas surprise," Lenora said cheerfully. "You've got your life all figured out, Maris. This is just for the things you don't need right now. We thought it'd help keep things organized." I nodded, said thank you. My voice sounded like it came from someone else. Was I furniture now, stored for convenience? Seraphine walked over, still holding her condo keys, and nudged my shoulder playfully. "Open your other gift. I told Mom you've been trying out new recipes. It's perfect." I peeled away the wrapping from the box she handed me. Inside was a cooking set. A very familiar one. The copper-bottom pans were scratched just where I remembered. I had donated that set to the family cabin years ago. Still had my initials etched beneath the lid handles. It wasn't new. It wasn't thoughtful. "I thought you said you were cooking more now," Seraphine chirped, sipping from her flute. Nothing says "we see you" like reheated recognition. I looked at the storage key again. The metal was cold in my palm. I could hear the others laughing, toasting to Seraphine's new chapter, talking about the condo's skyline view and proximity to her favorite gallery. I wasn't mad, yet. I wasn't sad, yet. What I felt was a kind of stillness, like standing outside your own body and watching someone else get pushed out of a photo. I sat on the armrest of a chair, swirling the wine in my glass, not really tasting it. Memories flashed like static. Every holiday, I brought the wine, bought thoughtful gifts, made it on time. And every year, Seraphine would stumble in late, dramatic, and be greeted like royalty. I must have looked distracted because my father came over, putting a hand on my shoulder. "You know we're proud of you," he said, "but Seraphine's had a harder run of things. This is her time." Her time, my storage unit. As the conversations continued, I stepped outside. The snow had begun falling again, lightly this time, dusting the deck and turning the backyard into a postcard. I pulled my coat tight, clutching the key in one hand, my phone in the other. A notification blinked. A message from Tara, an old friend from college. "Is it true they bought Seraphine a condo? You always said they treated her like gold." Damn, girl. I stared at her words. I looked back at the window, watching my family in slow motion. Seraphine spinning the keys like a prize, my parents glowing beside her, not once noticing my absence. Not this year. I stepped back inside and shut the door behind me, brushing a dusting of snow off my coat sleeve. The laughter was still echoing from the living room. Seraphine had launched into a story about a gallery owner in Columbus who once told her she had too much presence for regional art. Everyone was eating it up. Applause, laughter, head tilts that said, "You're special." I stood at the edge of the room, invisible in plain sight, watching as my sister turned a throwaway anecdote into a standing ovation. The champagne was still flowing. The condo keys sparkled in her hand like a royal emblem. She waved them around, unconsciously or not, each swing a reminder of who got to be celebrated tonight, and every other night. I made my way to the dining table, just as people started finding their seats. I slid into an empty chair on the far end, tucked between an old neighbor and one of Seraphine's art school friends I'd met maybe once in 2008. He turned to me with a friendly grin. "Hey, sorry, I thought you were a cousin or something. I've just never seen you in any of the family photos she's posted." My fork paused midair. The comment wasn't meant to sting. It was casual, even well-meaning, but it pierced deeper than if he'd said nothing at all. I smiled politely. "Nope, I'm her sister." His eyes widened. "Oh, wow, really? Huh." He didn't apologize. He didn't need to. The damage had already been done, long before that dinner. That comment was just the latest layer of confirmation. I glanced around the room, my eyes landing on a series of framed photographs along the hallway wall. One caught my attention, taken the previous summer. I remembered that day, a barbecue in the backyard. I had flown in for a weekend, helped set up, even made the grilled corn my mom bragged about to her book club. And yet, in the photo, I was nowhere to be found. Seraphine was center frame, flanked by our parents. The caption below read, "Our shining star. So proud." Lenora had said earlier, "That was the best summer we've had in years." I was there too, I thought. Dinner rolled on. The sound of forks on china clinked rhythmically. Seraphine dominated the conversation like a seasoned performer, shifting seamlessly from tales of inspiration to personal tragedy, always landing on applause. Reuben leaned in for every word. Lenora occasionally dabbed her eyes when Seraphine mentioned how hard it was to stay true to herself in a world that doesn't understand art. I cleared my throat once, mentioning a recent project I led at my firm, a financial restructuring initiative that had helped dozens of small business owners stay afloat through Q4. Nobody responded. Reuben nodded vaguely, then turned to Seraphine and said, "Didn't you once think of starting your own gallery?" Just like that, I was swept aside. Again. I sipped my water, watching as every sentence my sister spoke turned into a conversation, while mine evaporated into thin air. At one point, I tried to chime in about a new analytics platform I was testing, only for Lenora to interrupt and ask Seraphine if she was still seeing that guy with the beard. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was normal. That's what made it hurt. It hit me then. This wasn't new. This wasn't an accident. I wasn't being forgotten. I was being actively minimized, because they didn't need me to shine. They needed me to reflect their chosen star. Sometimes the most painful silence isn't when no one hears you. It's when they hear you and pretend they didn't. I set down my fork and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling like it held the answers I'd been chasing for decades. Maybe I'd always been the extra. The backup plan. The practical one. The one you don't applaud, just assign things to. The one you call when you need help, but never when you need a story to tell. Underneath the table, my phone buzzed. I glanced down at the notification. Credit alert. New inquiry on your credit profile. I frowned. I hadn't applied for anything. I tapped the notification, but the app was still loading when Lenora stood and began clearing plates. Her voice chimed over the hum of conversation. You know, it's just a blessing to be together. Not everyone gets this kind of closeness. The irony nearly made me laugh. As I stared at the glowing screen in my palm, a different kind of tension bloomed in my chest. The condo keys, the applause, the photos, now, this. That was when the second crack appeared. The applause faded, and the echo felt dangerous. Back in the guest room, the walls felt closer than they had earlier that evening. The laughter from the other side of the house had quieted, replaced by the occasional clatter of dishes or the muted murmur of post-dinner cleanup. I sat on the edge of the twin bed, the one with the floral comforter that hadn't changed since high school, staring at my phone screen. The credit alert still blinked up at me. I opened it. A new hard inquiry has been registered under your name. Lender, Oak Hill Property Finance. Purpose, residential mortgage application. Location, Cleveland, Ohio. I didn't breathe. Not because I was surprised, I wasn't, but because this confirmed what my gut had already been screaming. The condo wasn't a gift, it was leverage, taken from me, used without my knowledge, wrapped in a bow, and handed to my sister like a prize at a school talent show. I paced the room, the carpet dull and familiar underfoot, and with each step, my thoughts spiraled backward. Not just to tonight or the dinner table silence, but further, deeper, into places I had boarded up so long ago I'd convinced myself they no longer mattered. I was 13 the summer Seraphine started prepping for college applications. She had declared she needed space to breathe, to think, to create. The house suddenly felt too small for her genius. One afternoon, while I was at a friend's sleepover, Mom moved my things into the basement guest room. No warning, no discussion, just done. When I asked why, Ruben said, "You're always so adaptable, honey. That's your gift. Adaptable, meaning disposable." That winter, Seraphine painted my old walls lilac, my favorite color. She didn't ask. No one asked. I told myself it was temporary, that once she went to school, I'd move back upstairs. But that never happened. Someone else stayed in that room. Then guests. Then it became Seraphine's studio when she visited. I was never invited to reclaim it. And eventually, I stopped waiting. I paused near the old bookshelf, my eye catching a beige folder poking out from a drawer that didn't close properly. The logo on it matched what I'd seen before. A legal firm in Lakewood. I'd noticed it years ago, but never gave it much thought. Curiosity burned hotter now. I pulled the folder out slowly, careful not to make noise. Inside were 2 sets of documents, stapled neatly. The first was a will dated 2015. It listed both daughters, Seraphine and me, as equal beneficiaries. Trust shares, life insurance, property. All equally split. The second will, updated in 2021, was shorter. More focused. Only one name appeared. Seraphine Delling. No mention of me. No note. No explanation. Just white space where my name had once lived. "When you're edited out of a legacy," I whispered, "you wonder if you were ever in the draft." The sting didn't come from surprise. It came from confirmation. I sat on the bed, folder in my lap, and stared into nothing for a long time. The walls felt less familiar now, almost staged. Eventually, I reached for my laptop and logged into my financial account. If they had accessed my credit for a mortgage, there had to be a trail. And there it was. 3 logins in the past 2 weeks from an IP-tagged Delling desktop, Dad's office computer. I hadn't used that thing since my last visit. I never shared my passwords. But he had once helped me recover a login years ago when I got locked out. Maybe he kept the credentials. Maybe he never cleared the autofill. If they needed help, why didn't they ask me? Or did they already know I would say no? A different kind of silence filled the room now. Not absence, but deliberate exclusion. The lilac paint, the will, the unauthorized access, the photo, the keys. This wasn't favoritism. This was a strategy. Strategic erasure. They weren't just failing to see me. They were actively writing around me. My jaw clenched as I pulled up a blank document. The cursor blinked at the top like a dare. I typed a single word. Attorney. I hadn't even begun to fight yet, but I had just picked my first weapon. The glow of my laptop screen cast pale light across the guest room. I stared at the word I had typed just before midnight. Attorney. It sat alone on the document, blinking like a quiet alarm. I hadn't added anything else. Not yet. I leaned back in the chair and let my hands drop to my sides. My mind wasn't just racing, it was calculating. Was I doing this because I wanted revenge? Because I wanted justice? Or was I just desperate to be seen? Really seen, for the effort, the loyalty, the silence I'd swallowed for decades. The sun was barely up when I heard footsteps creak down the hall. Voices followed, casual, tired, laced with that forced cheer families put on during the holidays. Christmas brunch was starting. I shut the laptop, tucked the file away, and took a long breath. I told myself I'd play nice, just enough to avoid a scene. But when I walked into the dining room and saw the table fully set, with name cards and calligraphy at each place, I knew. There was no seat for me. Every chair was taken, each with someone's name written and folded neatly in front of their plate. Even the kids had name cards. My name wasn't anywhere. Lenora noticed me lingering and said without missing a beat, "Oh, sweetheart, sorry about that. We didn't expect so many people to show up." Reuben was already pulling a metal folding chair from the hallway closet. "You're always so flexible," he said with a little laugh, setting it at the very corner of the table. "Figured you wouldn't mind." Seraphine didn't even look up. She was sipping a mimosa, scrolling through her phone like none of this was new to her. And it wasn't. This was a pattern. I sat down on the cold metal seat and stared at the plate in front of me. No napkin, no silverware. I wasn't part of the head count. I never had been. After brunch, while the others scattered to open more gifts or refill drinks, I caught my mother alone in the kitchen. She was humming, wiping down the counter like it was any other day. I stood there for a second too long before she noticed. "Something wrong?" she asked, not turning. "I saw the will," I said. Her hand stopped moving. "I saw both versions," I continued. "Mine and the new one." She let out a soft sigh. "Maris, come on. You've got a great job, a condo, freedom. You don't need—" "I don't need to be part of the family?" "That's not what I said. You said Seraphine's life hasn't been easy." "Well, it hasn't. She's always struggled, emotionally, financially. She's an artist." "And I'm what? A spreadsheet with legs?" "You've always been the strong one, Maris," she said, finally meeting my eyes. "Strong people don't need reminders they're loved." My throat tightened, but I kept it steady. "So strength means silence? And silence was consent?" She didn't answer. She just went back to wiping the counter, like that would erase what I'd said. Later that afternoon, I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, and Seraphine was already there, leaning against the island like she owned it. "Don't ruin the holidays," she said, without even a greeting. "Just because Mom and Dad love me a little louder." I stared at her for a long moment. She didn't flinch. "You might want to check where those keys came from," I said. My voice was calm, flat. She narrowed her eyes. "Excuse me?" "Check the paperwork, the names on it, then tell me if they still sparkle the same way." I didn't wait for her response. Back in the guest room, I folded my clothes into my suitcase. I didn't slam drawers or stomp my feet. I moved slowly, methodically. I'd learned long ago that rage rarely wins. Strategy does. From a folder in my bag, I pulled a printed copy of a financial power of attorney revocation form. I'd prepared it months ago, after a long conversation with my financial advisor about boundaries and access. I signed it, slipped it into a white envelope, and walked quietly to my father's office. The door was slightly ajar. I slid the envelope under the desk and left without knocking. As I walked back toward the hallway, I heard voices behind the kitchen door. "Do you think she knows?" Lenora whispered. Ruben's voice was tired. "Even if she does, what's she going to do about it?" I stopped mid-step. What was I going to do? I smiled to myself. They'd find out soon enough. The word attorney no longer felt like a whisper or a concept. It had weight now. It had texture. It sat at the center of every thought I carried back into that house. I moved through the halls like I was walking a blueprint of a home that didn't belong to me anymore, if it ever had. The family had migrated to the den for the gift exchange. Wrapping paper was already starting to pile near the tree. Seraphine was stretched across the center of the couch, like a showpiece, casually discussing throw pillow colors for her new condo. Ruben chuckled every few seconds, not really listening, just responding. Lenora floated between guests, topping off glasses, offering cookies, humming as though the world she built wasn't fracturing under her roof. I needed to breathe, so I grabbed my keys and slipped out the back. The drive to the storage unit was silent, except for the hum of the heater and the occasional buzz of my phone. I didn't answer any messages. I parked in front of a drab row of concrete doors, all identical, all cold. I entered the code printed on the Christmas card they'd given me, "Your space for everything that matters," and pulled open the door to Unit C24. Inside, the air was musty, like cardboard and forgotten holidays. Stacked along one wall were boxes labeled Seraphine Studio, 2012-2015, and X Mas Decor. I spotted a cracked canvas in the corner, her signature barely visible beneath the dust. My name wasn't on a single box, just the lease agreement, the contract, the liability. Even in their backup plans, I was the one holding the weight. I stood there for a long time, arms crossed, eyes scanning the clutter. A few of the boxes were falling apart. One had water damage. It hit me then. Not even Seraphine would store her things here if she had a choice. This wasn't a gift. It was a transfer of burden. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I took pictures. On the drive back, I pulled up an old voicemail I hadn't listened to in over a year. Something had stopped me back then. Maybe intuition. Maybe self-preservation. Lenora's voice came through, casual, mid-conversation with someone else. She hadn't meant to call me. It had recorded her by mistake. "Marius was never really one of us," she said, chuckling faintly. "She's not the kind of daughter who needs us, or wants us." There was a pause. Then her voice again, lower, like confession. "She's too much like her father's side. Cold. I gave up trying years ago." I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a while, letting the last bit of warmth from the vents dry the ache in my chest. Back inside, I didn't speak. I didn't make a scene. I pulled out my phone and quietly deleted every future calendar invite from the family. Easter, 4th of July, Thanksgiving, all gone. Then I composed a text to Ruben. "I'll need a copy of the condo purchase agreement for my records, since my credit was used." I pressed send and dropped the phone face down on the kitchen counter. 10 minutes later, Lenora stood in front of the fireplace with a mug of cider and said, loud enough for the room to hear, "Can we all take a moment to appreciate our little hero from Seattle? Always doing big things in that big city." She smiled in my direction. It was sugar-coated poison. Ruben remained silent, staring into the fire. Seraphine, seated again, like a queen in her corner of the couch, locked eyes with me, narrowing hers slightly. She knew something had shifted. I wasn't hiding it. I walked over to the gift pile. My box was still there. Bright red wrapping, oversized bow. The cookware set, still unopened. I picked it up, walked to the front hall closet, opened the door to the donation bin we kept by the entryway, and placed the box neatly inside. Lenora's smile faltered. "Maris?" I turned to her, calm and even. "Sometimes," I said, "the best gifts are the ones we return." She didn't respond. The room went still. I turned back to the hallway and disappeared around the corner, but not before catching a glimpse of Seraphine, her smirk gone. Reuben stood rigid, as if holding in something sharp. Lenora clutched her mug like it might slip. The gift exchange was over. Returning the gift wasn't just a quiet protest. It was a declaration. A boundary drawn not in anger, but in certainty. I'd spent years tolerating the small jabs, the overlooked invitations, the way my name was always an afterthought. But this was different. This time, they'd crossed a legal line. And now, the apology I had once quietly hoped for was irrelevant. The house that evening hummed with artificial warmth. Seraphine was doing a second gift unwrapping near the fireplace for the guests who arrived late. Lenora passed around slices of pie as if nothing had happened. Reuben sat in his recliner, staring into the flickering fire, his expression unreadable. They were acting, too normal, too smooth, and that only deepened my resolve. Back in the guest room, I opened my laptop and logged into my credit monitoring dashboard. A red flag blinked at the top of the screen. FICO alert. Your score has changed. I clicked through and found the document. A mortgage pre-approval under my name. The lender? Oak Hill Property Finance, Cleveland-based. The co-borrower? Blank. The owner listed on the condo title? Seraphine Delling. I felt my stomach tighten. The condo was financed using my credit history, but Seraphine was the sole title holder. I'd been used as a guarantor, without so much as a call, a conversation, or even a passive mention over Christmas dinner. So, I was good enough to finance her future, just not important enough to live in the story. I opened my password manager and began pulling logs. If this had happened under my credentials, someone had accessed them. It took less than 5 minutes to trace the source. 3 logins from a Cleveland IP address in the week before Christmas, each tied to my father's desktop. Downloads included my most recent tax statements, credit history, and loan eligibility reports. I hadn't used that computer since Thanksgiving 2021, which meant someone had either saved my credentials or accessed the system after I left them logged in. I leaned back in my chair and pressed record on my phone. I spoke quietly, more for myself than for evidence. If they went this far, maybe they never planned to ask permission at all. The longer I stared at the screen, the more I felt like I wasn't reading my finances. I was reading a playbook, a blueprint for a heist where I was both the architect and the unknowing victim. My eyes landed on a bookmarked tab I hadn't touched in over a year. Property records. I clicked and entered the parcel number for the duplex I'd co-invested in with my parents years ago. Back then, I'd contributed nearly 30% of the down payment. It was supposed to be part of my future. A family asset, my father called it. The ownership deed had been changed. My name was gone. Only 2 names remained, Reuben and Seraphine. No notice, no signature, no payout. I didn't just lose a property, I lost a piece of my own narrative, rewritten while I was busy playing the stable daughter, the dependable one who never asked for anything. I started printing, screenshots, downloaded statements, log activity. I opened a folder on my desktop and labeled it, Delling Case 2023. Then I opened a blank spreadsheet and started drafting a timeline. Dates, transactions, emails, unanswered texts, voicemail transcripts. This wasn't emotional anymore. It was procedural. It was around 10 when I stepped into the kitchen for a glass of water. Most of the guests had left. Lenora was picking up stray paper cups while humming along to a holiday playlist. Reuben had gone upstairs. Seraphine was standing by the stairwell, arms folded, drink in hand. She looked up as I approached. "You're not saying much tonight," she said, her tone neutral. "I've said enough," I replied, opening the fridge. She hesitated, then stepped forward. "I know this is weird for you, but try not to make it ugly, okay?" I turned, glass in hand. "Ugly? I mean, with the condo and the money stuff. It's Christmas." I set the glass on the counter and walked toward her. She didn't move. I leaned in slightly and said, just loud enough for her to hear, "I hope you picked out furniture you like, because you won't be staying long." Her eyes widened, the edges of her smirk faltering for the first time all day. I walked past her, out of the kitchen and up the stairs. I wasn't waiting for their apology. I was preparing my evidence. It wasn't anger I felt when I woke up. It was confirmation, the kind that settles in your chest and doesn't shake loose, even after a full night's sleep. I didn't dream. I didn't toss. I laid still, blinking at the ceiling, the echo of Reuben's voice from 2 nights ago still present. Even if she does, what's she going to do about it? I slid out of bed, pulled on a blazer I hadn't worn in years, and tied my hair back. It wasn't about looking nice. It was about walking into a room prepared for war. Downstairs, Lenora was bustling around in her apron again, humming a song that had no melody. She greeted the neighbors like nothing had shifted. There was a holiday brunch set up, mimosas, quiche, fruit trays. I hadn't been told about it. Of course I hadn't. My phone buzzed. "Tara, please tell me you saw your sister's live last night." I frowned. I opened the link, and there it was. Seraphine, seated on her new couch, eyes puffy and mascara smudged, talking into her front-facing camera like a soldier at a confessional. "This whole thing," she said, voice trembling, "has made me question everything. My own sister, someone I've supported and admired, has turned against me. I think she's projecting her work stress. She's been so alone lately. I don't blame her. I just hope she finds peace." Thousands of viewers, heart emojis, comments like, "You're so strong," and "Don't let her ruin your light." She didn't stab me. She just handed the world the knife and stepped aside. I walked into the dining room, still holding the phone. The room was full now. Neighbors, family friends, people who'd seen our lives from the outside and bought the version that had been sold to them. Seraphine smiled brightly, now dressed in a perfectly draped winter white turtleneck, playing the gracious host. Lenora raised her glass. "No holiday is perfect," she said sweetly, "but forgiveness makes it shine." A guest I didn't know well leaned toward me and whispered, "You really should let her have her moment. She's always lived in your shadow." I didn't flinch. I just smiled. Inside it burned. I waited until everyone had a plate in their hands, conversation humming with holiday noise. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out 3 envelopes, white, unmarked. I walked to the coffee station, handed one to Reuben, one to Lenora, and slid the last across the table to Seraphine, just as she reached for her coffee. They opened them slowly, one by one. Inside were printed screenshots, the mortgage application in my name, the deed transfer on the investment property, the credit access logs, and dates they couldn't explain away. No one spoke. I didn't need them to. Reuben cleared his throat. "This isn't the place." I sipped my coffee. "I agree. That place was 3 months ago when you signed without me." Lenora's eyes darted around, already calculating what neighbor was watching. Seraphine's hands trembled slightly as she folded the documents back into the envelope. "You didn't have to do this in front of everyone. You didn't have to do any of it behind my back," I said evenly. I stood. I wasn't angry. I was exact. Seraphine excused herself and disappeared down the hallway. Lenora started rambling something about misunderstandings and family healing. Reuben said nothing at all. I didn't offer rebuttals. I didn't raise my voice. I let the papers do the speaking. I walked toward the door, stopping just short of the entryway. "If I had ever meant as little to you as your paperwork suggests," I said calmly, turning toward them, "you should have just said so." Then I gave them what they feared most: certainty. "I've already filed. You'll be hearing from my attorney." There's a kind of silence that lingers after a truth too loud to deny. Not the awkward hush of a moment gone sour. No, this was something heavier. A hush that settled in the walls, in the floorboards, in the way nobody met anyone's eyes the next morning. It was the kind of quiet that tells you everyone's pretending things can still go back to the way they were, except no one knows how. I woke early and dressed without ceremony. There was no point in waiting for anyone to initiate a conversation. They wouldn't. Instead, I drove into downtown Cleveland, snow tires humming on the pavement, the city half asleep behind post-holiday stillness. My attorney, Ms. Green, met me in her small office just off Euclid Avenue. No holiday wreaths, no music, just a clean desk and professionalism that didn't flinch. She reviewed the packet I brought, nodding slowly as she flipped through each page. "Cease and desist for misuse of credit," she said. "You want to attach it to the mortgage documents?" "Yes," I answered, "and I want an injunction on title transfer." She paused, looked me straight in the eye. "You're not just protecting yourself, you know. You're protecting future you from these patterns." I nodded. By noon, the documents were filed. Copies were emailed to Ruben, Seraphine, and Lenora. No message, no warning, just fact. I was back at the house by 1. The tension had crystallized into something almost physical. No one spoke as I walked in. No one asked where I'd gone. They knew, or they'd find out soon enough. I went outside briefly to check the mailbox and found a small envelope tucked beneath the windshield wiper of my rental car. It was handwritten, the penmanship shaky but careful. "Maris, I've seen the favoritism for years. I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner. If you need anything, a statement, a witness, someone to say they saw what they saw, I'm here. Jolene." I hadn't seen her at the brunch. She must have slipped in and out without fanfare. Or maybe she just knew better than to get involved openly. Either way, that note, it anchored me. It wasn't just me. They just made sure I thought it was. I slipped the envelope into my bag, walked upstairs, and ducked into my mother's bedroom to retrieve my charger. That's when I saw it. Sitting on her vanity was a velvet box. I knew it instantly. I'd given her that pearl bracelet for their 30th anniversary, custom clasp, hand-picked beads. It had cost me almost a full paycheck. She'd cried when she opened it. I opened the box. Inside, the same bracelet. Only now, the clasp bore a new engraving. SD. She had gifted it to Seraphine, a recycled heirloom. No note, no acknowledgement. Even the sentimental things got rewritten. I closed the box carefully, placed it exactly where I found it, and went downstairs. I didn't say a word about it. Not yet. They were all in the living room when it happened. Ruben reading the email from the attorney aloud in a half-growl, Seraphine pacing in front of the fireplace. "You're freezing the transfer?" she snapped. "You can't do that. It's already in motion." Lenora jumped in, voice high. "You don't understand the stress your sister has been under. This is bitterness, not justice." I stepped into the room like a surgeon entering an operating room. "You didn't just forget me," I said calmly. "You forged around me." Ruben stood, hand out as if he could slow it down. "This isn't necessary, Maris. We're family." "No, you were family. Until you turned my credit into a weapon, my property into a ghost, and my name into an afterthought." Seraphine shouted, "You always make yourself the victim." I tilted my head. "Funny, you made yourself the star. I just showed up in the credits, if at all." Nobody followed me when I left the room. Nobody asked me to stay. Upstairs, I packed slowly. Every zipper closed with precision. I wasn't rushing. I was done rushing. For them. For the illusion. I carried my suitcase to the door and didn't bother saying goodbye. Halfway down the driveway, my phone buzzed. A voicemail. Lenora. I didn't listen. I tapped and held the message until the delete option popped up. If you do this, don't expect to be welcomed back. I pressed delete. I didn't need to be welcomed back. I was finally free to walk forward. The Airbnb wasn't much. Bare walls, borrowed linens, the hum of a fridge that didn't quite seal, but it was quiet. That kind of clean quiet I hadn't known in years. I dropped my small overnight bag on the floor and stood for a moment, looking around the sterile room like it could answer something. Everything I had left behind at the house, I realized, had never really been mine. I could make a list: the bracelet, the guest room, the family name etched into property deeds. But it wasn't the items that stuck. It was the weight they carried, the proof that I had clung to things long after they had let me go. I plugged in my phone to charge and saw a missed voicemail. It was from Jolene. I played it. Her voice was softer than usual. Maris, I didn't say this at the brunch, but last March, Lenora had a health scare. Heart palpitations, hospital overnight. I found out through Donna, not them. I asked if you knew. Ruben just shook his head and said, "No need to bother her, she's busy with work." I thought you should know. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. They hadn't even thought to tell me. Or worse, they had thought and decided not to. I remembered that month. I had texted Lenora about a work trip in Chicago. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji. No mention of hospitals, no mention of needing anything. I thought she was just being distant. But the truth was, I'd already been written out of the who to call list. The phone doesn't ring when you're no longer part of the family script. I opened my messages to scroll for something else when a group chat popped up. One I'd forgotten I was still in. It was from a cousin. The same one who didn't say a word to me at brunch. "Hey Maris, things went too far. You made your point. Maybe it's time to move on, for the family's sake." Another cousin chimed in. "Forgiveness is healing. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be." Of course. The classic American family deflection. Let's sweep it under the rug so we don't have to trip over it at Thanksgiving. I typed and erased a dozen replies. Then I left the group. Forgiveness without accountability is just permission. I spent the next hour staring at my inbox. Legal correspondence from my attorney, copies of bank statements, screenshots I had compiled. It was a strange thing to sit in a room surrounded by proof and still feel hollow. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I was adjusting. I opened a blank document and started to write, not to them, but to myself. A reflection, a map. I wasn't trying to make sense of it anymore. I was acknowledging that sense had already been made. It just wasn't the story they wanted me to accept. Tucked inside my bag was a childhood scrapbook I had taken out of the house in haste. It still smelled faintly of cedar from the basement. Stickers peeling, Polaroids faded, page after page of school recitals, report cards, birthday cards with crayon handwriting. I had kept it thinking I'd use it one day, to show someone who I was, to prove I'd belonged. But I didn't need it anymore. I took it to the kitchen trash, set it in gently, and closed the lid. They kept the house. I kept my name. The heater clicked on, and I folded into the couch with a mug of tea, the steam clouding my glasses. Outside, the sky was gray and forgettable. I wondered if they were sitting around that same dining table, now a battlefield of glances and murmurs. I wondered if they missed me yet, or just missed the version of me that didn't talk back. Then my phone buzzed again. A new number. "Hello, this is Erin from Halston & Carr. We're calling to confirm your current mailing address on behalf of Ruben Delling." I paused. "May I ask what this is regarding?" "I'm not at liberty to say, ma'am, but the firm's name should be familiar to you." It was. So the next move was theirs? I hoped they were ready for what came next. I had walked away quietly, but the consequences didn't. They followed me like an overdue invoice, showing up at my doorstep in the form of emails, bank alerts, and calls I ignored. My silence wasn't retreat. It was strategy. And now the follow-up was starting to land. 3 days after Christmas, I was back downtown. my attorney, Ms. Green, met me at her office with that same calm fire in her eyes. We sat in her conference room, the heater humming behind her desk, frost clinging to the corners of the window. "The condo," she said, tapping a printed file. "It's worse than we thought." She pushed a document toward me. "There are unpaid property taxes attached to it, old liens from before the foreclosure. They never told you that when your credit was used as a guarantee." I read the figures. It felt like betrayal wearing paperwork. They'd called it a fresh start, but it was just a new layer of debt, in my name. "They're already behind on the first quarterly installment," she added. "The county could begin repossession proceedings within 60 days if they don't resolve it." And it would have come back to me. Eventually, yes, if it defaulted. That's the reality of being listed on a loan. Silent liability. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. How do we remove my name? I already filed a petition for separation of obligation and fraud documentation. You should be safe, but it's going to ripple. Let it ripple. Later that afternoon, Seraphine received the cease and desist notice. I didn't send it directly. I didn't need to. The court did it for me. Ruben got a call from their bank's fraud department, flagging the co-signed accounts tied to his household IP. Lenora called around 5, her voice cracked and thin. "This is going to destroy everything we've built," she said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even feel angry. "No, Mom," I said. "You destroyed it when you decided to build it on me without asking." There was silence on the other end. A breath. Then the call disconnected. That evening, my phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, I received another call, this time from a Cleveland number I recognized. I answered. "Hi, this is Ted from Buckeye Storage. I'm following up on the account under your name. Unit C24? Yes. There was a request last week to switch the billing to a Seraphine Delling. Said it was just a misunderstanding. She told us, 'My sister's name is just paperwork.' We flagged it because your name is the one tied to the lease." My mouth tightened. "Did you happen to get that interaction on camera?" "We log all desk activity. Want us to send you the footage?" "Yes," I said. "Please do." I hung up, set the phone down, and sat in the silence. They always saw me as the infrastructure, not the air. A support beam they could lean on, bend, and repaint, never imagining I'd walk out and let the whole roof cave in. That night, I wrote an email to Ms. Green with one additional request. I wanted complete financial separation, no shared accounts, no overlapping trusts, no automatic access. I want my name removed from anything that allows them to act on my behalf again, I wrote, anything that makes them think I'm still part of their system. Then I logged into our joint investment platform and closed the account. The final legal tie, a cut cleaner than any spoken goodbye. I felt lighter, not vindicated, not victorious, just free. Around 8 p.m., as I was roasting vegetables and listening to a podcast, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a courier standing with a small envelope. "Signature?" I scribbled mine and took the letter. The handwriting on the front was familiar. Seraphine. I held it in my palm, stared at it for a while. It was heavier than it should have been for such a small thing. If it was another performance, I wasn't the audience anymore. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for nearly an hour before I touched it. Seattle was cold but clear, and I'd cracked a window just enough to feel the air on my face while I unpacked. I didn't open the letter out of curiosity. I opened it because I no longer needed to be surprised. Seraphine's handwriting was unmistakable, neat, with those strange wide loops in her Y's and G's. The letter inside was short, honest, but not noble. She wrote about how she always felt like the fragile one, how she didn't know what to do with the attention except lean into it. She admitted that Mom and Dad always made excuses for her and that she'd accepted it, not because she thought she deserved it, but because she didn't know how to push back. Her final line caught me off guard. "I always felt you had everything. I only ever had their guilt." I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage either. What I felt was distance. Not coldness, but perspective. For the first time, I saw her clearly. Not as the one who took what was mine, but as someone who'd spent her whole life clinging to the parts of me she didn't know how to become. We weren't sisters. We were mirror images in different lighting. Later that night, I opened the footage I'd pulled from the security camera, one I'd installed a year ago when they started arguing about safety upgrades at the house, but never followed through. I'd forgotten about the backup footage saved to the cloud. The clip loaded slowly. I remembered the day as soon as I saw it. Last May, Lenora's birthday. I had driven down with a wrapped gift, a book of family photos I'd restored and printed. I stood at the front door, wearing the same gray coat I'd now tossed in a donation bin. In the footage, she opened the door, glanced at me, and said with a tired smile, "Oh, we're only having family inside today. Can I just take this?" I handed the gift over. She nodded once, turned, and closed the door behind her. I had completely forgotten the camera had been rolling. It wasn't just exclusion, it was choreography. The next morning, I cleared my contacts, deleted the family group chat, removed mom and dad from my emergency list. I logged into my online will platform and updated the beneficiaries, replacing their names with Kara, my closest friend, and my goddaughter, who had always remembered my birthday, even when my parents forgot. It wasn't out of spite. It was peace, and it felt light, lighter than anything I'd done in months. I wasn't trying to erase them from my life. I was acknowledging they'd already removed themselves. I was just closing the door they'd left open for the wind. That afternoon, I stepped into the tiny office at a legal clinic downtown. The paint was peeling, the light flickered, but it was full of women. Women who were sitting in chairs I'd once occupied metaphorically, financially gaslit, undermined, strategically cut out of stories they helped write. I volunteered as a consultant once a week. No salary, no accolades, but it filled something I hadn't known was empty. One of the women I helped looked at me and said, "It's like I wasn't real until I stood up and said, 'Enough.'" I nodded. "Sometimes healing doesn't look like repair," I told her. "It looks like clarity." I meant it. It was late when I got home. The city was quiet. I made a simple dinner, folded laundry, and played jazz on a speaker I hadn't used in years. Then, as I was rinsing my mug in the sink, my phone buzzed. A voicemail. Unknown number. I played it. "Maris," Ruben's voice said, quiet, slow. "If you ever want to talk, you know where the door is." No background noise, no apology, no warmth. Just a sentence that dangled between invitation and accusation. I didn't hesitate. I deleted it. I knew where the door was, but I'd already chosen which one to walk through, and it didn't lead back. The voicemail was gone, deleted like every trace of access they'd once claimed to me. "You know where the door is," Ruben had said. He was right. The door was never locked. But knowing which ones never to open again? That was the real gift. Seattle was gray, cool, and just wet enough to feel like a reset. I stepped into my attorney's office wearing a navy coat, my hair pulled back. No need for ceremony. I wasn't there for revenge anymore. I was there for conclusion. "Congratulations," Ms. Green said, sliding the file across her desk. "Mortgage reversed. Title restored to lender. Your name's been cleared from all financial obligation." "And Seraphine? She'll have to refinance independently or surrender the property." I nodded. "And the family trust?" "Severed. The judge agreed your inclusion was done without informed consent. Your name no longer appears on any active estate structure." I exhaled. She leaned forward. "Ruben and Lenora have been flagged on the financial misconduct list. It's unlikely they'll qualify for credit above $10,000 for the next 3 years." I didn't win back their respect. I reclaimed something more valuable, my autonomy. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the courthouse and signed the final affidavit. Full disassociation from the Delling family assets, portfolios, and emergency designations. No more joint anything, No more quiet assumptions that I'd catch the slack. No more documents filed just in case. If they ever need help again, I told Ms. Green, they can apply the old-fashioned way, through a form. She chuckled, but I wasn't joking. That night, I opened my laptop and began to write. The words came naturally. The title, I was the financial backup plan, not the daughter. I hit publish and forgot about it. Within 3 days, it had been reposted by women's finance groups, divorce forums, even a therapist specializing in family trauma. I got emails from strangers. You said what I couldn't. Thank you for naming it. I thought it was just me. A podcast reached out. Then a panel. Then a local nonprofit. One small ripple became something larger. Not viral, but real. One morning, I received a final email from Lenora. No subject line. We were wrong, but family still means something, doesn't it? I replied, it does. That's why I don't let just anyone call me family anymore. No signature, no warmth, just truth. A week later, I stood outside the brick building of a nonprofit downtown. My coat collar turned up against the wind, coffee in one hand, the other holding a small plaque they asked me to unveil. The glass door creaked open. A young woman greeted me with a wide smile and showed me to the wall. There it was. The Connolly Foundation for Financial Dignity, founded 2024. In honor of those who rebuilt from silence. I didn't get a key. I became the architect. They built walls. I built something worth walking into.